у Китая с Америкой, не меньше противоречий. Они, может быть,
China and the US have no less disagreements. They may not be exposed so clearly in the media, but they are the two main, if not the only, opponents for global economic and financial leadership. Not so long ago, Chinese officials reiterated that they stand firmly in favor of a political and diplomatic settlement of the restoration of China's unity. But should the West continue its provocations and encourage Taiwan to refuse peaceful reunification, China will not rule out any means. Amid all resonating and public invectives occasionally exchanged, it has never even occurred to anyone that the US might back away and boycott China, suggesting that it should be isolated. No one could ever imagine that. And regarding Russia, former US President Joe Biden saw himself as a teacher, a mentor, someone who makes judgments. The resumption of proper dialogue with US President Donald Trump is natural. The fact that it became a sensation for many is a legacy of the Biden mentality, which sought to normalize the complete isolation of Russia. It was unspeakable stupidity. Surely, it has not been implemented. Dialogue is being restored gradually. Most importantly, there is a mutual commitment, despite the challenges and differences in national interests on a whole range of issues on the international agenda, perhaps on most of them. It is essential to have meetings as well-mannered, polite people and listen to each other. That is exactly what is happening. As for Europe, the US wishes to reduce NATO expenditures, primarily on the maintenance of US troops and their contribution to the defense of other alliance members, as well as to examine which country has a trade surplus and which one has a trade deficit. All this is happening, although chaotically. This is the reality. This is the policy the US president pursues. If you follow the discussion in our society, you know that we are not running after anyone, we are not asking to lift the sanctions. We have a powerful group of opinion leaders who believe that lifting sanctions would be disastrous, as liberals will immediately attempt to undermine all these achievements in import substitution, sovereignisation of our economy, production, and security in those areas on which the country's development depends, namely military, food and technological security. There is a growing concern that now these clever Americans will suddenly lift the sanctions and immediately flood our market with the services and technologies on which we got burned. I am absolutely certain that President Vladimir Putin is right when he repeatedly drew attention to this matter, that we must no longer fall into dependence in areas that are critical for the survival of the state. I believe that in this debate between those who say that sanctions should never be lifted, the step which will make everything worse, and those who argue that the country will then return to the closed from global economy, I support the former. The discussion of closed economy is difficult. There is no globalization of the world economy anymore. It has been destroyed. And not by Trump, but by Biden, when he imposed sanctions and made them the only tool of his foreign policy. We were not alone. We face a record number of sanctions. More than half the world's countries are under sanctions, various restrictions: China, Iran, and Venezuela. These are the major beneficiaries of this good. But more than 100 countries are subject to unilateral sanctions by the United States one way or another. French President Emmanuel Macron cries that Russia is obliged to fulfill the United Nations Charter and international law, but never mentions the fact that, contrary to the resolutions of the UN General Assembly and the will of the residents of several African regions, they keep pieces of these territories. Perhaps they enjoy traveling there on holiday. It is beautiful with palm trees growing there. You will not find such a picture in Paris. There is filth and crime. We remind our friends in the United Nations that when they claim it is necessary to act in accordance with the UN Charter, they should agree, including their chief, to address each and every issue strictly according to the principles. The principle of self-determination is linked to the principle of territorial integrity. The UN General Assembly Declaration on Principles of Relations between States adopted in 1970 proclaimed to respect the territorial integrity of all states whose governments do not violate the principle of self-determination and therefore represent the entire population living on the given territory. Does Zelensky and his band represent the population of southeastern Ukraine? They never did. When the UN Secretary-General states today that the Ukrainian crisis should be resolved via relevant resolutions, he is referring to the Russophobic, entirely hateful resolutions that have been adopted over the past 3 years by the votes of those who have been blackmailed, threatened, and coerced by the West.
Мировой экономики больше не существует. Она была разрушена